I will address some issues that I'm dealing with my research that has to do with some aspects that already Jan spoken and also Caro about my issue has a lot to do with theory and the way we perceive design and what design is, and if this perception that we have is not being influenced by some gaps or some problems in history. There are a lot of people talking already about this problem since '87, but there has not been a real solution yet. Jan spoken that design word now, and it's not only the only word. Lots of words like, for example, love has been tremendously influenced, grown in use in the pop culture, and he's spoken about hair designers, and there's also designer drugs, and there's designer jeans and cake designers. So there's designers for everything. And so this seems to be an attribute that we put on things when we want to make them look more valuable. It looks like a play from Molière when there's a guy that is rich, becomes rich suddenly, and he enrolls a teacher to help him to learn things, and he's completely amazed when he discovers that he can speak in prose. And so this seems to be a little bit like this character in Molière play. We have a lot of words, a lot of expressions in Portuguese to what design, what we can teach design. So these are all courses in Portugal. We have communication and visual and product design, service design, etc. And but words are important in this case, and so I will stick with the first one, the first course that started in '76 in Lisbon, where they decided to call it communication design. And this is seems to be just a detail, but in fact most of the world calls graphic design, and the people that founded this course thought it could be better to call it communication design. And in fact, very recently, World Graphic Design Day became World Communication Design Day. So we now feel that we are not graphic. Graphic is just the end of the story. We are communicators that use graphic elements to do so. And so communication design in Portugal, the word communication seems to be good. But we still have problems with the world because design in the popular culture is perceived as something that has to do with the shape, the final shape of things. But also in the most, in another context, in a more knowledgeable context, he also, the word design is used for several things. For expressing an activity, the act of practicing design, also the process to do design, the way to make design, how design operates, the result of this operation, operation of doing design, and even the products themselves, the things that result from this process generated by a designer. So there's a lot of also, the world design is not a fixed world, and it's in my opinion, it's not a problem, because there's a lot of issues like this in other professions too. So we know that, for example, Carol talked about doctors. Doctors do have a huge amount of activities. Some of them deal with patients. Others don't see a patient for their whole life, and they still call doctors. Even the guys that run the hospitals, the management of the hospital, he calls himself a doctor, although he just does management. So it's not really a problem for us, although we must be aware that this happens. I used an idea proposed by Wittgenstein when he in his philosophical quests, he decided to, how can we define a thing that has no borders? And he used the example of games. He knows that there are several types of games, some cardboard games, games with balls, games with people, And in all these games, we call them games, and they have different set of rules, different ways of operating, and he used an expression in the Portuguese translation, and now I'm translating to England, so obviously it's not accurate. He said, don't think, look. And because when we look, we see what these things have in common. They have the idea of families in great quantity. I tried to translate the Portuguese translation of Wittgenstein, which is good. It's a very good translation from the German. And so he talked about a complicated net of similarities that overlap and cross each others, and similarities of group and also of details. Families similarities, he called. So this idea of family that Wittgenstein proposed has also a parallel with a family in the human field. So we have in my family we have some things in common and some things that are not, but we feel this part of this family. And sometimes even people that were not born from the same blood, as we say in Portuguese, are part of the family. So one of his questions is, how can we explain to a people from other planet what is a game? And the answer he proposes is, I think we should describe him games, and then we can add to this description, to these things that are similar, we call games. And he says that this type of description, we don't do it by ignorance or because we are not capable of, but because we ourselves cannot know the limits of these things. So we cannot summarize all the traces, the common traces, and so because we are short of definitions, any definition can be misinterpreted, so this is the best definition you can do. And so we might try to look for these family similarities, and I will do it in a very light way because Carol has done it much more brilliantly than me. So I was thinking if I should or not quit this conversation before, because he has done it so well, and my version is it's a kind of TV program, afternoon TV program, very light. When we look at, in 2013, I asked Amazon which were the best-selling books with the words history of graphic design or history of communication design, and he gave me those 4 books. Meg's books, obviously, Holly's, Eskilsson, and Drucker books. And I've made a lot of measurements in this book about lots of things, and one of the measurements was how many objects do these books contain that are graphic design. So what do they consider graphic design? The number of objects like books, magazines, posters. And so it's a fairly small amount of number of objects that they consider graphic design. So in, for example, Meg's books, only 17 objects are considered graphic design. In this book, for example, called the Encyclopedia of Ephemera, he lists 482 types of graphic ephemera. So obviously we are leaving behind 465 objects that we don't think they are design. And so we're trying to first look at this very briefly with this idea of family of some of these objects that we are leaving behind. First of all, a lot of prints that have to do with maps or engravings to astronomy or contracts or even money documents, insurance documents like this one from 1077. So there's a lot of documents that are designed by someone because they don't appear from vacuum that were designed. And although there are a lot of books in history of design, there's so few records. And records, for example, has a huge impact on popular culture. So these were the first rock and roll singles in Portugal. So all these records, they have a huge impact in, for example, teenage life, and they are not considered as design. And also, And as you know, for me, we should look for the history of graphic design since the 15th century. We have the coats of art, the shields from the knights. We have tapestry. We have scenarios for parties. We have a lot of things that someone had to design. Someone had a client that did something and he had to design it. Another example, for example, is flags. Flags are completely absent of history of design. And it's strange because they have a huge symbolic importance to a lot of countries. So each time there is or a game of football or some other thing, everybody uses the flag, and it's so symbolic for all the countries. Our flag was designed after a competition that proposed several people to compete, and this was the winning proposal, and even the group that won the proposal had to do some drawings after, because they accepted this version, but they wanted to be improved in some ways to become our flag. So flags don't count as design, for example, or even types of letter. We just count the lead types of letter, or what we call typography. So epigraphy, for example, this is from Castelo Branco, from the SE, it's completely absent, or even calligraphy, and writing by hand is also absent. Also musical editions, for example, when there was no electricity, the only way to listen to music was to have a musician, so all these elements have a huge importance also in people's life. We have also labels of every kind, so this is liquors, and also this one still exists, the palpério in Valongo, cookies. And also timetables, someone had to design these things. Tables, graphic information of every kind, the almanacs, newspapers, editals, public editals, that killed people. Lots of people were killed because of these papers. And also official documents, like for example money. Money doesn't belong to any history of graphic design, which is strange because it's in our everyday life, present in every moment, and it has a huge impact on our lives if you don't have it. So money is, and it's heavily designed as a security measure and also as a symbolic representative of the country. We had a huge contest for euro notes that symbolizes the bridges and from Europe. And also here is a telegraph from Christmas, and the official and religious documents, stamps, coins, and etc. We also have posters and advertising in the broad sense, including these kind of the signs that were in the public place before. And we have even souvenirs, things that remind people, that have a huge impact on people. The things that companies use to communicate. So stationery, this is a very popular Portuguese company a lot of years ago. We also have some moving image that were important to communicate, and in our days with the web, moving image has a huge impact. Everything has to have some kind of movement. Even in our phones, we click on things and they have some kind of movement. So after all this vague collection of things that we are leaving behind in graphic design histories, I was also concerned in how they do it. And this might be the core of the thing, of my talk at least, because this may encapsulate an important perspective to understand and to better teach design to our students. First of all, we have to stop telling them just that posters are design and banknotes are not design, are just things that happen by accident or almost by accident. And also we should look at things that have a huge impact on our daily lives. So if every one of us receives every week one of these kind of things in his mailbox, obviously this is important as a graphic design object to a certain time, to a certain group of people, in a certain place. And it's not because it's ugly according to our standards that we should not include it as design, because we are not making, as Falcão put it in his book, a history of gourmet objects. We are making a history of graphic design, and this is one kind of object that is permanently in our daily lives. So this kind of print makes part of our daily lives, and maybe we should be more concerned about a society that needs these kind of things to operate. So we might look at these objects as things that make other things work. It's like a hammer. We can see a hammer as a tool to put nails, but we can also look at the hammer as an object that is produced in a society that needs this kind of object to do some kinds of things that are important to the society. So in conclusion, there's a Brazilian writer, Rafael Cardoso, which I like in particular. He writes about the thing about a student, about this idea of making designers. And he said he's not a designer, he's a project and a promise. So he sees students as a project and promise. And also in this new book, he writes that design is an area turned historically to the planning of interfaces and for the optimization of the interstices. I don't know how to translate this. Interstices is this kind of things that we have inside. So like the guts, I don't know how to translate. The word interstitios in Portuguese, is to tell about veins and the way that our stomach works. So these things that we have inside that we don't look, usually we just want them to work. So obviously some professions go away, and this is a profession that went away as soon as the semaphore came along. So as soon as we had automation to drive cars, we took this guy away and he lost his job. So this is obviously going to be true. And I just use this photo because I really like this. I don't know if any of you had this idea, but back in the past when there was Christmas, we have this kind of tradition that in our days would be considered very wrong, completely wrong, to give to policemen things in Christmas. Corruption. So corruption, pure and simple. So in Christmas there was this tradition of passing through the Polícia Sinaleira, that was the name of these guys, and give them something. And this was even backed by a newspaper that promoted this idea of giving policemen, so it would be nicer if you do something wrong in future, because you just give him bacalhau, so he likes bacalhau. And this guy will obviously have a wonderful Christmas, because this is in Caixo Sodré, which is a huge hub in Lisbon. So they wanted the best places because there will be more cars and they will receive more bacalhau. So in conclusion, we have to broaden the field of objects that we consider made by designers. And obviously, when we'll do that, this field that is very narrow of 15 objects will grow immensely. So we have a huge amount of objects that were designed. And this is not bad. This is a good thing. But theory will get much more complicated because it's much more easy to do history with 15 objects. But we should not be afraid of that. It's like we go in an archaeological field and we found a huge amount of objects. For an archaeology, it will be good. You would not say, wow, this will give me so much trouble. I would like to find only 15. But we should try to find objects that connect people with society, so connect individuals with society. So when a person leaves home in the morning, he will have a lot of things that were designed by someone that are important to his life. He will have eventually a bus with information, we'll have a seat to sit, we'll have a waiting place to wait for the bus, you will have maps, you will have a lot of things. And a lot of these things are very important to his life. So we should look at the relationship between the people and the society, where they live in the time they live in, and look for these objects that make the connections if you want to make the theory of this profession. And not be afraid of design that has no author or that has an acknowledgeable author that we don't know who it was, or that was made by groups. That's another thing we learn when we see this history of graphic design of Philip Max, that design is not made by groups of people. It's made by individuals. So, for example, when they show work from Pentagram, they don't put pentagram, they put Paulo dot pentagram. So we don't like design done by groups of people, and design is, at least in my professional practices, done usually by groups of people that work together, and where the client, the commissioner, I also prefer the expression commissioner because sometimes it's not even present, has a huge impact in the final work that is produced. So it's not the designer worked alone in the studio, very tortured by creativity, that will produce really nice posters. So this talk will not add a lot of information to the kind of questions that we... this is one of my favorite present objects, because, and it's a good example, desculpa Melanie, estás farta de gravar com isto. It's a good example of this kind of connectors with people, between people in society. So there are people today that are willing to spend money in an object that the only function is to take photos of himself. So this, I am not saying this in a critical sense, to say this is bad for you. I could say that, but I will not say that. I'm just saying that we should look at this as it is. So this is an object that is used so I can take photos of myself. Certainly has some good things, certainly has, but it tells things about the present society. And we cannot ignore it as an anonymous object, probably produced in China by millions and sold all over Europe for people that have this object by millions also. So it's an important object for our generation, although it's eventually not very well designed, or because it's very popular and it is in everybody's pocket. So if we consider these interfaces between relationships in societies, between people, individuals, and the society, we can try to help these projects and promises that are the students that Rafael Cardoso talks about, so they can operate and be much better succeeded professionally in a very complex world that we live in. So, thank you very much. Foi 15 minutos.